I couldn't save my video files because my laptop was literally out of memory or out of disk space, so it kept crashing trying to save videos. Hopefully I captured all the stuff from the last ones. I'll have to do some effort to put them together, so it'll be a while before I get them uploaded. So today I wanted to talk about your oral exam and thesis proposal. These are two elements of the PhD program, and I'm going to relate them to sort of what you've been doing now, and one of the reasons why I stressed some of what I did for the survey paper, besides that it's actually what it takes to make a good survey paper. I pushed that this year instead of the actual doing your own research paper first, because most of you are in the category where you have to do your oral exam and thesis proposal, even if you've done some research, and we'll come back to how those are. But I want to make sure everyone who goes through this class knows all the rules of our PhD program. So first, the oral exam, which is actually now on the website, I think is called the comprehensive exam. And that could be a point of confusion because a couple years ago, our comprehensive exam was the thesis proposal. And we changed the name because campus says you can only have so many credits before you can only take so many credits before you've completed your comprehensive. That's their rule. So rather than making sure, you effectively have to have your thesis proposal done in your first 2 years, because they said you can only have 15 credits before you have to be done your comprehensive exam. We said we're going to make the oral exam called the comprehensive. We just changed the labeling. And so now you still have to get it done, but your thesis proposal can be a little bit later because we had a number of students running into a problem with that. So the oral exam is an oral presentation and a written report that surveys the literature in the planned research areas the students may pursue. That is, it could be the paper you just wrote. Right? Actually, the paper you wrote is more extensive. So it says a few example papers. Generally, it's 10 to 15 papers that you and your thesis advisor / committee work out. And that's what you're going to go in. The one difference is, compared to some of your survey papers, is we actually expect a comparative analysis. Not a list of here's paper 1, here's paper 2, here's paper 3. We're expecting here's what's in common across them. Here's what's different between them. Here's what's shared, what's different. That level of comparison is fundamental part of what you're doing for your research. Then you're going to present that to an examining committee of 3 faculty members from the host department, us, and your faculty, if you're ECE, it'll be their department, right? And the ECE rules are actually slightly different. This is actually CS and security. ECE has a slightly different set of rules, so I forgot about putting those up there. But the oral exam for the CS and security folks are 10, 15 papers, and then we're going to ask you questions about them. And the question's not what's in this paper. It's why did A do this and B do that, and how are they different, and what's better or worse, whatever. We're looking for you to do that comparative analysis. And that's what I was looking for you to be doing in some of the survey paper. One of the rules you have to understand, students having any sponsorship from your advisor, research funding, department teaching, or whatever, are supposed to pass that oral qualifying exam by the end of the first year of admission in the PhD program. Some of you have already missed that requirement. Most of you, that requirement is coming up real fast, right? Either in December this year or May of next year. So how many of you finished the oral exam? Okay. So some of you are saying, but I'm in my second year, what's going on? So we have not chased after you. I stopped being chair of the PhD program last year. Ching took over, and then Ching took a sabbatical, and no one forgot to follow up with that this year, or you should have gotten an email beginning of the semester saying, you need to get it done. But now that you're through this class and you have your survey paper, talk to your advisor and say, I want to get this oral exam done this semester, right? Because it should be pretty straightforward to take a subset of your papers and a subset of the analysis you've already done and just get that over with. You can try and convince your advisor, and they know at least one of you already has tried, that your survey paper is your oral exam report. It's got way more papers than you need, but say, that's okay, I did a lot more research. We'll only talk about these 10. So, because your advisor doesn't want to read all the papers you put in your survey, but you can go through that process. So if you're not funded by the department, you actually have 2 years to finish it. So if you're self-funded, doing whatever, you have 2 years. You have a little bit more time. So it's not everyone has to do it in one. Formally, the student has 1 chance at this oral exam. So your survey, and when you go in the room, you better be able to do the analysis and answer those questions. Make sure you're ready for that. It's not a huge burden, but you should go in prepared, right? And given what you've done, it's hard for me to tell because you many often only have a paragraph. You might not understand those papers well enough that if I'm on your committee, I will ask you interesting, tough questions. You have to be ready. So you might take your survey paper as the beginning and then delve deeper into a section or two to get a little bit deeper on those. Any questions on the oral exam? So there's one other. If you what? The waiver process. So the waiver process is straightforward. There's a slight difference between security and computer science. So if you have published a paper since you joined the PhD program, and it's in a conference or technical conference with selection rate less than 40%, or for computer science, peer-reviewed sources such as well-recognized international journals, highly selective international conference proceedings, then yes. But the work needs to be done after joining it. The request comes not from you, but from your advisor, who has to say, that's work. Generally, your advisor's name's on it because you did it here, but you can actually still have one without your advisor if you did it while you were in the program here. In the PhD program, this is pretty easy to decide. The CS program, you have to make a petition, and the committee will look at it and say, is that journal good enough? As a member of the PhD committee, I will tell you the first thing I do is I look up what is the H index of that venue, right? And if it's not very good, the answer is it's not very good, and it doesn't count. If it's good, it's fine. So we have a number of students who have get out of it every year. So if you can turn your survey paper into a published thing, you can get out of it if you're in the right time frame. But otherwise, by the end of your first year, if you're funded, second, if you're not funded, Mark, I have no idea if I don't think you're considered funded because it's not from our department. So you've got an extra year. Right? You're not funded because you're working in the College of Business, right? Yeah. So you have a full-time job outside of us. Then you get 2 years. That's the little difference. If we're paying for you, we expect you can get stuff in. So.
I actually was over the summer. I had a full-time job last year elsewhere, and then over the summer I was a research assistant.
The summer? Yeah. Don't worry about it.
My advisor on sabbatical.
Yes. So are you hitting a deadline or the 2-year mark? So you might be able to, for example, when is your advisor coming back? So who's your advisor, Ching? Ching Yi, yeah, sorry, yeah. Yeah, that's going to be a good one. I don't know when she's coming back. She's actually on leave. She's not on sabbatical, right? She's on sabbatical leave, some weird mixed process, My recommendation is ask her, when can I get it done, right? Because it depends on her being here as your advisor. But are you still communicating with her on a regular basis? Yeah, then say, well, you're going to be around, we can do this, right? So you can have, in fact, your advisor can be in some other country, right? Almost any time we talk about having a committee meet, we live in the virtualized world, and like the last thesis defense, I had one thesis defense so far where there were one person here, 4 people online, right? It's the worst one we've had, right? 3 of the faculty were actually from here, but they weren't here. So next week, or this week, Thursday, Swati, one of my PhD students, is defending. One of your committee members is calling in from Crete. One of us is calling in from California. I will be here. One's in Germany. I don't remember where the 5th one is, but I'll be the only one here. Everyone else is someplace else, right? So your committee member does not have to be here for you to do the oral exam, right? Just interact with them and get it to happen. So she is, on sabbatical as chair of the PhD committee. So she'll probably say, yes, we should give him an extension, but it's in your interest also just get it over with. So the CS document, by the way, says waiver to comprehensive exam. This is on the website right now. I pulled these last night, or yesterday when I was making these slides. The CS version needs to be updated, so the committee will get around, if nothing else, because they have the wrong word. It's not the comprehensive exam. It says the comprehensive exam. There is no way to waive the thesis proposal. Oh, hold it, no. The oral exam, right? It's the security one. It's called the oral qualifying exam. It should now be called the comprehensive exam, right? Instead of, so I knew one of these two was outdated. We get them updated and fixed. But, okay, so your thesis proposal. Your thesis proposal is, this is what is the oral comprehensive exam, right? So the goal of this is to ensure that you have a fundamental grasp of the fundamentals of your research area through some study of the topic, and the ability to conduct innovative research. And this innovative research is where we want to see that you know not just what's in the paper, but what's lacking, what are the gaps, how I would compare things, how I would combine them. So we're looking for that creative side of your reads, not just the summary side. Many of your survey papers were not even critical or creative. It's the summary side of reading. Like, here's the overall gist of the paper, right? We're looking for you to have more of that critical, creative side. So if you have those notes, make sure you keep those. That's what's going to drive your ability to go in. And then it's the ability to exchange ideas and inform members of the advisory committee. So your committee wants to look at this and say, yes, we understand what you're really going to do. So this is the other one that has to be changed. This is what's currently on the website and is wrong. So this is now talking about the thesis proposal. The thesis proposal, you can't enroll for more than 24 credits of dissertation prior to passing, it says the comprehensive exam, it should say thesis proposal. So that was changed with the graduate school last year. We just forgot to change the website. We probably changed some document someplace, but not the one that's on the website. So your thesis proposal, we actually now have 2 sets of rules. And we ran into this because the graduate school wants you, so I'll actually jump ahead, right? The graduate school says you must complete 15 credits after their proposal is accepted. And they measure that time from the census date. So if they do it in the middle of the semester, if you do it before census date, it counts for this as this semester. If I do it after census date, it counts towards next semester. There's a little bit of leeway because census date is a date you may or may not know, but it's pretty much the beginning of the semester. So if you were to complete your thesis proposal this semester, you still have to register for 15 credits after this semester, right? But you also can't enroll for more than 24 credits prior to passing the thesis proposal. Right? So there's a gap. So you need 30 credits total. If you've collected 24, you still have to do 15. You're not doing 30. But if you're an international student, you also have to take enough to stay full time. So you have this. That's why we changed the rules. They viewed it as we made the thesis proposal has to be like you can't have completed more than 15, and you have to complete 15 after. They thought that's great. It's like dead in the middle. It's like no, students might need to go a little bit longer, or you could have a hard time with your research topic and go off on the side. So you want to collect your thesis credits reasonably fast, but not too fast. Right? Because if you get too far along, you're running this 24 credit limit, and then all of a sudden not be able to take things. And you really don't want to be deep into your research and now say, well, now I have to take a regular class again. That's just not where you want to be. So get your research, you get your thesis proposal done. Now, the actual number of thesis credits you can take is nearly unbounded. We'll get to that in a second, but right, if I get my thesis proposal after 15 credits, I can take 40 credits afterwards. Right, and so it's not a problem of how many credits I can take for the thesis. It's I can't take too many thesis credits before you have an approved thesis proposal. So you'll have to make that work out. So the thesis proposal, you actually basically have a committee now of 5. There's not a big formal structure. It's whatever thesis proposal you can get through. We'll talk about what goes in it and what that looks like in just a bit. But I've been on ones that students have done their thesis proposal, and this 15 credit limit becomes enforced because I had students who wanted to do their proposal in September and graduate in December. Okay, the graduate said no, they should do the proposal long before they're ready to graduate. So they didn't actually let that student graduate until May because they had to take a bunch of credits in September, in the fall semester, and then in the spring semester to get their 15. They ended up with more than 30 credits, but the graduate school, that's their rule. Ideally, you want to get it pretty early. My students, pretty much in my lab, you need to have a paper or 2 or 3 published before I'm happy with your thesis proposal. But I've had students who don't, right? So that's not where I want to be, but that's where it is. I'll come back to that in a little bit. But if your committee finds that you're ready to begin thesis research, they can, if they don't think you're ready, they can make you do some other things before it. We've had a couple of students who did not pass their thesis proposal. It just wasn't, they weren't ready. Then the committee will give you some suggestions, and generally you come back and do it again. I don't think we have any formal limit. I know of at least one student who's done it twice before they passed, so on the 3rd time they finally made it. Normally it's once, and you are now absolutely petrified, and you are going to be so prepared the 2nd time, we don't have to worry too much about it, but sometimes you can. If at least 4 of the 5 committee members say you pass, you pass. So it does not have to be unanimous. That's even true for passing your thesis. I will tell you, I have never been in 30 some years on a committee where the thesis advisor said no and the student passed. Okay, and that's, I don't know, 50, 60, 70, I have no idea how many theses I've been on, tons of them, right? If your advisor says no, do not go into the room. Just bad things will happen. So let's look at what is the purpose and what is the structure of this sort of look like. So the purpose of a thesis dissertation proposal is to demonstrate you understand how to conduct your discipline-specific research. And discipline-specific here isn't general CS, it's your sub-area of research. Because NLP is different than vision, is different than systems, is different than compilers, is different than theory. So you have to understand it. So you got to demonstrate you know how to do that and how to conduct that research. And as I told you, my preference is my students, I generally don't want them in there until they've actually published some papers. Why? Because that shows everyone else on the committee that people outside of this university understand they know how to do research because they've actually done it already. It removes a lot of the uncertainty. In my experience, the earlier you go in, the more your committee will drive it down a path they see for you, rather than the path you and your advisor see for you. So if you can publish 2 papers, you've pretty much set your path pretty far along, and they're not going to tell you, no, you should go over here. Right? If you go in really early and you have nothing, then it's easier for them to say, yeah, that seems way too risky. You should go over here. And now you're being directed in a path you don't want to go down. So, or maybe you're going down a path your advisor doesn't want to go down, which is why I push my students down a particular path before they get there. But you can demonstrate you know how to do that without having any published papers. You might actually have preliminary results that are not yet published. That's perfectly good demonstration you know how to do this. And I've even been on dissertations where they had 0 preliminary results. They just had a really good idea. Okay? And maybe more importantly, they had a really good description of how do I evaluate when I'm there. Right? There's actually lots of research where the hardest part of designing your experiment is figuring out how to evaluate it, not to figure out what pieces there are. You might say, well, you know, I can try these 8 different things, and then I'll try new combinations, right? One of those should improve this compared to where the state of the art is. Because if you identify a big hole, no one's ever done anything in this space, then it's not hard to be the state of the art because no one's ever done anything in this space. The hard thing is how do you prove what is state of the art? How do you design it? So if you get on that path, you can actually go pretty far without having any preliminary results, but a really good design of here's how the experiment's going to work. That's actually far more common in spaces outside of computer science. But in parts of computer science that do human factors, interact with people, where it can take a long time to collect the data, you might have preliminary results. In fact, you want to get your experimental design and your thesis approved before you go spend 5 years collecting data, or 3 years collecting data. I mean, I don't remember how long she took, but we had one student whose design all was done. She had to get it approved by her company to go do all the work. So you want the thesis proposal before you spend too much time on the path. So doesn't have to be, although I talk about doing publishing first, doesn't have to be that's where you're at. There's a balance wherever you're going to go. But it has to create this roadmap for your research. Here's the research we're going to do. Here's how I'm going to evaluate it. Here's where the thing's going to go on. And it's really the purpose is then to give your committee your material to review, challenge, advise you on your plan. That's a good idea. That's not a good idea. Here's where I see problems. Hopefully your goal is not to go in and have people just say yes. Actually, that's not a bad goal if you have all the plans. You really want them to give you advice, things you didn't see, things your advisor didn't see. The reason the committee has to be so broad is because your advisor may have a much more myopic view of the world than the rest of the committee. They will bring in other questions. But if you go in and you actually have no changes, then you did a good job preparing for it, or you have a really weak committee. And this is sort of tricky. I don't actually have slides on this, but choosing your committee is actually pretty important. The goal of your committee is to help you, not to just give you the easy pass. And I definitely have students who go in and say, well, I don't want so-and-so because they will give me a hard time. Well, as an advisor, I'm saying, well, that's who you want. Andras Rosa, one of my recent students, we ended up getting 3 people from Google to be on his committee because while I could have gotten some other faculty in our department, he's doing adversarial stuff, we just don't have many people know what's going on, right? There's like 2 of us who do anything in the adversarial space. What do you do for the other 3 members of your committee? when we went out and got committee members who actually knew what's going on. It's also a good way for you to sometimes broaden your networking circle. People who are in industry don't get to serve on very many of these committees, and some of them might think this would be fun and interesting. So asking what might seem like a really big name that you would say, this person, why would they ever do this? Well, it's community service, and you know what? It can actually be interesting. They can learn and feel like they're contributing back. If they don't get to mentor students very often, then that might be a fun thing to do. So your audience is your academic advisor and the committee. And part of your job is to help drive that committee to be the people who will most help you. That's a conversation, however, to have with your advisor. Right? Formally, you don't ask people to be on your committee. Your advisor does. Pragmatically, your advisor may delegate it, but some people don't like it if you don't follow the rules, and you ask somebody, and now it's very awkward. If you've asked so-and-so to be on your committee and the advisor didn't want them, they now have to uninvite them. That's just tacky. And you may think, oh, this is great. I will force my advisor's hand. It is generally not good to play that game. It might work, but yeah, don't count on it. Expectations are generally that this proposal is done by the end of year 3. Okay, if you look at that 24 credits you can collect before then, right, you're going to have done some regular courses, and then you're going to start on PhD dissertation. And if you do 6 credits a semester, that's 4 semesters, right? If you do 9 credits, it goes by even faster, right? So in the beginning, you might be doing some other courses. So there's a balance. Also depends on when you started. At this university, your maximum time for a PhD, without exceptions, is 6 years, which is why the expectation is you get it done in 3. Now, do we have 7-year students? Yes. That requires an exception from the dean. And after the 6th year, every year is a separate extension from the dean. So, and they're trying to cut back on this. They actually got some flack during our last accreditation review and from the state board, because we had some students who had been here like 10 years and still hadn't finished, and they cause all kinds of problems because that's well beyond the state expectations. So you have to have some pretty serious extensions to get out of it. So Ideal, one of my students just finished last week, right? He was an 8th year student, but he also went back home to Saudi Arabia for a year, was able to get some extensions. So there's extenuating circumstances. It happens. But somebody who's actually here actively for 10 years, actually the limit, the max is 14. They somehow got through the system. They don't want to see any more of that, right? It's not to your advantage. At a certain point, we just want to tell you, look, you're not making progress. You're out of here. Most of the time, we just kick you hard enough as you're getting close to that 7-year deadline that you get something done. And who knows, maybe we lower the bar just a little bit. Yeah, I've had my first student graduate who was not the first author on at least one paper in 30-some years, right? So, but at a certain point, you just have to help them get out, and it depends on where you're going to go. If you already have a job lined up, maybe you've learned enough, we can let you go. But, that's up to your advisor, so some won't lower the bar at all. Okay. What's in the proposal? So the parts of the proposal, this is not a required structure, it's sort of recommended. Title, abstract, intro, overall background, overall research theme, and then some research questions. And if you talk to other PhD students, you'll hear lots of people talking about their contributions. I actually like to think of them as their research questions, but I would expect a thesis to have at least 3, sometimes 4 or 5, different research questions you're going to answer. Those often manifest themselves as chapters. Sometimes it's only one really good question with 3 or 4 sub-questions, right? Because a big question might lead to sub-pieces inside of it, okay? But I like to think of them in terms of how many papers are there in your thesis. And my view is a good thesis is 3 to 5 papers out of it. In fact, where I first started at Columbia, right, we expected 3 published papers, right, before you got your PhD. And some of the people I know in Japan, they actually have, their thesis is what we call a staple thesis. It is literally, you have an introduction and you cite your own papers, and the thesis might only be 20 pages because you're not repeating the papers. You're citing them and discussing why they're important and how they're connected. And then the rest of it is you staple the 3 theses at the back of this document. So there's lots of variations of what a thesis can be, but here is a single coherent document, and I'll put the coherent in air quotes because very often it really is papers, and you rewrite the intro. So instead of saying in this paper, you do global replace the word paper with chapter, and a few things like that. And then there's one bibliography at the end. You do not have a bibliography per chapter. So this is where LaTeX will, I know some of you are still struggling learning LaTeX. When you start putting together a 200-page document with 150 references, you're going to like that LaTeX tracks them and will tell you you're missing this one and whatever. I did notice that a number of you stylistically, I know this is an aside, but if you're using references that use numbers, then the first time you use a person's name citing to a paper, so and-so et al. /cite and a number, okay? It's not a noun, so you can't use it to start like the first word in a sentence. I don't say /cite square bracket 23 or whatever, right? So you use people's names. Now, oddly enough, there are other styles you can use, and in your bibliography that actually turn citations into people's names in ways you can use them. So open parenthesis, Bendalia and Bolt is perfectly fine way to start, even though there's an odd parenthesis. You're using Bendalia and Bolt, right? And then you put the year after it in parentheses. So there's a proper way of doing references. Even though Bendalia and Bolt with a number after it is an MLA style reference, when you use it as a noun, as a person in the sentence, you put the numbers after. So there's some stylistic things. So you want to be a little careful about your style when you're writing your thesis to know what bibliography you're going to use and use that to solve it right. But keeping track of all of them is actually really important and sometimes a little bit tricky as you go through all that. So you're going to have those 3 research questions. For each research questions, you're going to have, this is one structure style, a review of the literature, the significance and implication, why is this important for this question, whatever your preliminary work and plan of work is, some balance of those. Here's what I've done, here's what needs to be done. Your possible methodology, you may or may not know how you're going to solve it, but you always want to have a plan for how you're going to validate the results, and then some timeline. And if the work's done, the timeline is, if there's any more future work to do. Do not feel compelled to add future work to everything you've already done. If you've done it, you can say this chapter is done. We're ready to move on to the next piece, and don't have to have that in. So the review of the literature, sometimes this overall background chart things, if the 3 questions are really tightly coupled, you can have one review of the literature and then each of the questions separately without separate reviews. Or you can put a review of each one. The review of each one is because you might have in the introduction in the background some high-level background, but not the detail specific to this particular approach. Right? So then you can reuse some pieces of the way you put the papers together. So what's the thesis proposal process look like? So you're going to decide on a general area of interest with your advisor. Hopefully you've already done that. You've been working on the survey paper. But you might have also said as you did the survey paper, as at least one of you said, the only thing I've learned from this survey paper is this is not where I want to go. Okay? That's a perfectly fine thing to learn out of your first year of first semester. It's like, I don't know what I want to do, but I know this isn't it. It took me a year and a half or a year to know that my thesis, right? The first year of my thesis, I was super happy about where I was going. Somewhere along the way, I said, yeah, this is where I want to go. I'm going to turn right and do something completely different. There's nothing wrong with that. You can even change advisors. Yeah. So, that just means I worked a lot. But, so you hopefully, in fact, before you decide on the general area of the advisor, these first 2 are sort of coupled. Do an initial literature review to narrow down and sharpen the problem definitions. One of the things I definitely think many of you saw during your survey is, wow, that's very wide. I want something narrow. But if you get too narrow, there's nothing left, right? So you got to find this balance of something broad enough that you can find something new to do, and narrow enough that you can master it all pretty quick. Okay, and that's really an iterative process as you go through that. And if you're not, so many of your reviews might still be using stuff that's 2 or 3 years old. You got to remember when you're starting to figure out your thesis research, this literature review should not be limited to things that were published 2 or 3 years ago. It should be stuff published in the last year. If you've not gone through every archive paper and every most recent conference paper in the area you think you're going, do so, because you don't want to spend 3 or 4 months working on a problem only to find out somebody else already done that, right? That just wasn't published in a big venue. And so you got to find the balance in that.
So,
Yes, Mark.
We repeatedly said in this class, archive paper are great sources of information. But yet, when you want
So in your survey paper, right, you want to be careful to not cite too much in archive because it's not peer reviewed. But the positive thing about archive is somebody is saying, I'm working on this, here's my preliminary results. So before you go down and start a thesis direction, you don't want to be 6 months behind the guy at CMU that just put that paper up on archive. Peer reviewed or not, somebody's working on that. So you need to understand what they're doing, how they're doing it, how you're different, because you don't want to do the same thing they're doing the same way they did, or it will never get published. Either theirs isn't publishable, in which case yours won't be either, or theirs will be published and you'll be behind them. Neither of which is a good position to be, right? So unlike your survey paper where I didn't want to see too many archive papers, your actual thesis research, before you commit down this direction, you want to be looking at that. And by the time you publish conference papers, you'll still cite some archive papers because they are the absolute recent stuff, and sometimes they're the only things you can cite, right? In the world of adversarial, there's just not that many things that are hard published, right? They come out so fast. So there's a balance there. But I didn't want them to dominate your survey paper. Okay, you good? Okay. So when I talked about those 3 contributions or 4 contribution kinds of things, right? It's really generally very related problems, right? So it might be, here's one set of data analyzed 3 ways. Here's one class of problems. Here's one approach. Here's another approach. Lots of different things, but they're related. You can end up with a thesis that is 3 very unrelated things. It's tough. It's really hard to make a story that connects them, right? And it's really hard to make your committee members happy, as I think I mentioned before, right? My thesis was that category. I actually had 6 chapters. The first 2 were published papers in one area, 2 were published in another area. The last 2 chapters were psychology experiments, and no one wanted to read the whole thing. The people who liked the theory had no interest in psychology. The psychologists wanted to read nothing about the theory. So it was not a coherent thing. They still let me graduate with it, but it just wasn't the right way to do things. I learned my lesson. I strongly recommend you go through this process. You spend some time trying to actually write down your problem statements, your hypotheses, and how you're going to test them. By far, in my view, when I look at a thesis proposal, the most important thing is that I understand what is the problem and how are they going to measure if they're successful. I actually care much less about how you think you're going to solve it. And the reason for that is my experience, and lots of other people's experience, has shown that if you have a good problem and you know how to measure success, you will find a way. But if you don't know what your problem is, you can't solve it because you don't know what it is, right? If you don't know how to measure whether or not you've solved it, even if you're sure what it is, you're not sure how to tell when you got there, right? One way of thinking about what your thesis proposal is, an ideal thesis proposal is a contract between you and the department that says, if I do this, this, and this, you're giving me a PhD, right? To write that contract, I don't actually have to know how you did the thing in the middle. I have to know that it's novel and it meets these criteria. And how you solve it, that's not my concern right now. I just want to be able to say, I know how to measure when you're done. If I don't know how to measure when you're done, you run the risk that you come in for your proposal and we say, yeah, but that's not good enough. You need to run it on a much bigger data set. You need to beat the state of the art by this much statistically, and you didn't measure statistics, right? You need to understand how you're going to do that so that the committee members can decide that. You do want to justify the potential innovation. The one thing I won't be happy with is if you come in and say, here's my problem, here's how I'm going to measure success, and all I did was I took Amazon recognition, I trained it on this data, and I got this result, right? I'm sorry, but you didn't have much innovation. You used somebody else's tool on your data, right? That's a very minor innovation. Now, would I be okay as a part of a thesis? Yes, as a part. But that can't be the major contribution of your thesis. So I'm looking for you to tell me in the thesis proposal, here is the potential innovations. Here's what I'm going to do that's different and why that's important. Here's the contributions. Yeah, it'd be good to have some design methods. You probably don't want to say, I'm going to solve this problem with no ideas how. It doesn't always go over well, although I'd be willing to accept it but if more likely, you're not going to tell me how because it's like, well, I have 6 ideas how to solve it. I'm not sure which one will work. I'm good. If I have no ideas how to solve it, that's not good, right? So you want some design processes, but you might say, oh, I got 3 or 4 ideas. I don't know which one's better. Well, that's fine. You can take your best shot, see where it goes, and work through that. You want to understand what is your experimental design, which could in fact be that you're going to have no theory, you're just going to have proofs. It's a lot trickier. If you tell me you're going to prove something, you better have some intuition to convince me it's true, or I'm probably not going to believe you can prove it, right? Either you have proved it, or you at least have intuition to say it's going to be proved, because it's really easy to write down theorems that cannot be proved, or that are false, both of which are not that hard to do. So you want to have some idea. If you have some theory, you want to see where that's going to go. You want your plan for validation. That's absolutely essential. You know how you're going to evaluate it, where you get data from. You may not have the data, but you can say, here's my plan. I'm going to do this. I'm going to compare it that way. And generally, you want some estimated timeline. As I said, having some published papers adds significantly to your credibility about your claims to be able to do the research and that your problems are solvable. Your committee members, your advisor hopefully has a lot of understanding of your problem. Your committee members will often fall off very quickly from I know your area to, so in computer vision, right, there's no one else doing half the stuff I do. But in machine learning, there's an overlap with Jagal on some stuff. There's a little bit of overlap with Rory and some other stuff. But compilers, right, there's no one understands what Ching does, right? It's like, okay, so for her committee members, like, I understand some very high level optimization, a little bit of compiler stuff, but I'm not in her league, right? Your next committee member, you very quickly fall off the expert. So oddly enough, your thesis proposal is a document written to computer scientists, not to experts in your field. So one of the other values of you writing your survey papers, you have to learn how to explain your sub-area to a broader group of people, at least in the beginning, because that is your committee members. Your committee members are all the other people. It is not likely that your advisor will say, right, I don't think this work is good, and you're going to go in. Right? So if your advisor thinks you're doing good work, he or she has already said, as the expert in the field, everyone else in the room is going to be asking questions from the non-expert point of view, and you've got to be able to answer them and think about them very broadly. And your ability to convince them that you can solve your problem is hard if you haven't published anything. But as soon as you published it, most of the committee members are like, okay, I don't have to evaluate can they actually do it. I don't have to believe the advisor. They've already done it. They've done it once. They got 2 more times. Yeah, they'll get them done. They got it twice. They've done 2. No problem. They'll figure out the 3rd. It makes it much easier to convince them. As I said, otherwise what they want to do is they want you to solve what they think is the more interesting problem or the more solvable problem. And that becomes difficult when your committee members are saying, yeah, no, you shouldn't go that way. You should go this way. And that's likely. So what problem do you want to explore? Talk to your advisor. If you don't talk to your advisor, you're going to have a bad time about this. Right? And every now and then we get students. So if you and your advisor cannot agree on a problem, spend more time talking about it. You can change advisors in the PhD program, but you can only change advisor if the accepting advisor agrees. You're losing, the person you're leaving does not have to agree, but in general, I don't know of any of those that have happened. If your advisor thinks you simply shouldn't be in the program, it's hard for you to stay in the program. Very few people will accept somebody that somebody else says isn't ready, because it's a lot of risk and very little reward. So if you and your advisor are having a hard time, talk through it. So the chair of the PhD committee is Ching, but she's on sabbatical. So if you're having difficulty and you want to talk about it from a program point of view, you can come chat with me, schedule it sometime. We can have a conversation. I've talked lots of people through difficult scenarios, but your advisor's driving this boat in terms of where it's going to go. You have a lot to say what's going on, but if they say you're going this way, you either find a new advisor or go this way, or convince them to go this way, right? It's not that they have the final, they might have the final say, but that doesn't mean you can't be convincing. I will routinely actually challenge my students by trying to get them to go down stupid directions. I used to do this aggressively to my Chinese students. Sorry, not to be culturally insensitive, but back in the early 90s, we had a number of students, and they came in with this attitude that professors had to be respected. They were always right? But not me, right? I come from a completely different attitude, and I had to break them out of, because if I would say something by accident, I'm dyslexic, I'll write an equation wrong, I will say something, I'll get left and right backwards, whatever it is, right? I don't want my students believing me because I said it, right? If I can't convince them, they have to convince me. So I would routinely actually go in and I would say something incredibly stupid and ask them to work on it publicly, right? And many of them would dutifully not question me. He's asked me to do this. It must be that I can do this, right? And inevitably, I would assign them something that's the equivalent of like the halting problem or something else that is provably undoable. But they would go work on it anyhow. And then like a day or two later, I come in, so what are you doing? They tell me what they're doing. It's like, why are you doing that? That's stupid. Why would you do that? It's like, because you told me. It's like, if I tell you to do something stupid, don't do it. If I tell you to jump off a bridge, you say no. That's a bad idea, right? You need to understand how to push back on your faculty member, right? Some of them will encourage it, some will not. So timelines. Definitely work with your advisor on the timeline. There are many directions. Your advisor might be steering you in ways that are not obvious. So when I had that experiment I did with students that were telling them to do something stupid, right? I can imagine many of them thinking, why is my advisor doing this? This is not related to what I'm supposed to be doing. This is not, interesting. It's not even doable, right? There was a lesson hiding in it. Your advisor might be testing you in ways you do or do not understand. They may not or may not even ever admit to you that they were testing you. So talk about your things with your advisor on the timeline. The advisor who's funding you might have other timelines they need to hit, like we have a report due in 3 weeks. You're going to work on that. We'll get back to your paper later. Or there's a conference deadline. Now, they may not want to get your hope up saying, we're going for this CCC paper deadline, because they might think the work's not good enough, but they say, I need to see this draft in 3 weeks. Whatever, right? They have a reason for doing that. The conference deadline might be a month and a half away, but they know in those last 2 weeks, they're going to be traveling. Right? You can't count on it. So work with them on whatever your timelines are. Check important dates for submitting and defending dissertations. Dissertations are surprisingly annoying to most people. Like if you want to graduate in December, you have to have defended your thesis by November. Right? It's not December, it's November. It's April. Right? It's more than a month before the end of the semester, so that there's time to do stuff afterwards. And you have to have your dissertation to your committee 2 weeks before that, which means you're handing out your dissertation in October, right? Before, if you want to graduate in December. And that surprised people at the very end. Don't be surprised. There's a bunch of stuff that goes into it. You might have to take into consideration other various factors like getting IRB approval, getting the rights to use the data, travel, design, testing. I know very few people who finish their experiments much faster than expected. Any of you experience that on a regular basis? Okay. Any of you experience the other? It takes much longer than expected? Okay. So plan your timelines, but don't be overly pessimistic. The timelines that you put in your thesis, right? We're not terribly surprised if you say it's going to take me a year and it takes you a year and a half, and we're not going to beat you up for it. But if you come in and you say it's going to take you 6 months, we will beat you up for being unrealistic if we don't see how you're going to do it in 6 months. We had a thesis proposal last week. Right? He was going to have the thesis done by this week. It's like, I'm sorry, do you have it done? It's like, no, I'm working this weekend. We'll have it to you. It's like, I just don't believe that. Right? It just isn't going to happen, right? But they have to hit these, like, they have to have it distributed this week to defend by whatever, right? There's a set of processes you go through. And maybe they'll have a lot of it done and they have stuff, they just don't want to show it to us. There's always a bunch of balances. But do an actual Gantt chart. If you don't know what a Gantt chart is, it's a conditional process schedule that says, I need this, after this is done, I can do this, and after this, it's funny how many students think, well, this will take me 2 or 3 weeks, and this will take me 2 or 3 weeks, but they forget that they can't be done at the same time, even if they're not dependent, right? If you only work 80 hours a week, right, then you can't do 2 80-hour-a-week projects at the same time. You have to sequence them. Now, if you work 80 hours a week and only 40-hour-a-week projects, you can do them at the same time, but there's a limit to how much you can stack up. So you want to put some of that into your timing. For your thesis, be realistic, right? You might think, I'm going to work all of Christmas break, and maybe you will. Your advisor might not, right? So you might go for periods of time when you can get 0 feedback. And those periods of time might not even be when you're thinking about it, right? Midterm week, which is unfortunately when I made your papers due, was also like I had to grade in 2 other classes, right? I have spent the last 3 weekends doing nothing but grading and a good bit of every week, right? I hadn't thought about that. And my students are trying to get their theses read because they have to defend. I had 1 defend last week, 1 this week, 1 next week. Right? So it's a very busy time of year. Schedule all that in terms of your timing as well. So if you talk about that with your advisor, you can sort of get them together. So my personal approach in terms of advice from your research, depending on where you are, in your first year, I recommend you try and go big. Go for tier 1 level problems, but either way, try and publish something. If at the end of your first year you have not published something, you are limiting your options for both internships and to learn from publishing. Whatever you did in this class, hopefully you will submit it for publication someplace. Find the best venue you can. In terms of that venuing process, you often want to go for the best possible venue. You see if it gets rejected. If not, then you work your way down. So plan out a schedule. What are the deadlines for journals, conferences that you can go for, right? If the journal will give you a response by then, you can submit it here, otherwise go through that process. But in year one, try and do something really big. And it's odd because that's the year you have the least results. But it's the year I said, go big. Because you also have the smallest amount of risk. You have more time. In year two, you got to reassess where you are. If you didn't submit anything in year one, you don't know where you're at because you got no feedback from outside on how good was the work you were doing. If you submitted it and it was accepted, then you start trying to climb up. If you submitted and it was rejected, you say, oh, well, it wasn't quite that good. I will go down with it. So you're going to try and go take the things you did in year one, turn them into things in tier 2 or 3 while you're working on your next big idea. In year 2, you still want to try one more big shot if you're doing on the normal process. But either way, try and get 1 or 2 papers out. And at that point in time, you're now ready to do your thesis proposal. Because published or not, you should have 2 or 3 things. Okay. In year 2 or 3, you're going to do your thesis proposal, and you're going to try and get out one or two more papers. And then year 3 or 4, you're going to try and graduate with 1 or 2 more papers. That's where I try and push my students. They don't all end up there, but that's where I push them. Right. My most prolific student graduated with 17 papers. My least prolific, 1. Right. So there's a full range you can get in there. But your proposal, you're really looking to get it done after you have 1 or 2 papers under your belt, because you'll have a much better idea of what is the research. When I talk about a timeline, if you haven't actually done any yet, it's really hard to do a timeline. And if you ask your advisor, how long will that take? Well, it might be 3 weeks in Terry time, but we don't know how to translate Terry time to other people's time. So how long will that take you? Could be 6 months. I don't know, right? Depends on, I have a lot of background. So that's a joke that's been passed around in my lab, right? I significantly overestimate how much my students can sometimes get done in a short period of time. The others is, I'll tell them, we have 3 weeks to this deadline. We're going to go for it, and we'll try, see where it goes. Any questions on thesis proposal? Okay, so there actually is a document, style, LaTeX form you can get and whatever. The graduate school is apparently becoming more flexible. We can actually give out more of these templates. But how many of you have talked to your advisor about your thesis proposal? Okay, a couple. So the rest of you, after you're done this class, start that conversation. I don't recommend you start it too early. If you don't have what you think is publishable research, you don't want to make them feel like you think I'm ready to do a thesis proposal when they don't think you are. Work towards what's our first paper. Get that first paper, but you should be thinking about here's where I'm seeing my research going and here's where I'm going to go with my proposal, but you won't actually get to that point until you've got a paper or 2 under your belt and see where you're going. And obviously you have to mix all this in with all the other classes you have to take. The paper you have to write in this class, the qualifiers, there's the written qualifying exams, whatever. There's a bunch of things that will be soaking up your time. However, I strongly recommend you don't put off starting on your research. So this class with your summary paper, survey paper, is starting you down some research, but you're going to have to talk about doing your own research, which will be our topic next class. I'm still trying to get, Teen actually had a really good idea. No faculty volunteered, as I mentioned last class. Now I'm going to try and get graduate students. So if any of you, if you talk to your advisor and they didn't sign up, if you know there's a graduate student who should come talk about how to do research in this topic, talk to them. I'm going to send out mail, but many of them need encouragement because they get absolutely nothing out of this except maybe some candy. Right? I'll have some more for them next week. But right. So what's in it for a graduate student to come give a talk to this class? Well, one, you will get to hear a research topic you want if you convince them and it's a topic you want. I don't recommend you try and convince people in topics you don't want to hear, but you can try anyhow if it's just their friends. But they will get practice. Okay, so next class I will talk about we'll start talking about your own research paper, the structure and doing some of that, and your presentations. If anyone wants to volunteer, I think Claudia already said you wanted to volunteer to do next week. I haven't actually given a talk on how to do a talk. Do you feel comfortable doing your talk without having a talk on talking? Yes, okay. So next week I will give a little bit about how to do a research presentation, and we will all give Claudia some feedback. And if there's anybody else that you want to do as a graduate student, the more graduate students we get in the first couple of weeks, then we can have your talks more towards the end. You get a little bit more time. Otherwise, I will start picking people to give talks.
Like you just give a talk on the you've done maybe and then give slides on that, or what do you expect?
So I'll talk a little bit about that next week. So your talk could be a talk on your own personal research, or it could be a talk which is sort of a survey of your field from your point of view, having done a survey paper, because that might be the only research. Right? You have some research results. Other people just started. They don't have any research to write about yet. So for those of you who do not have any research to write about yet, I am going to have you write a research paper as your final paper, your other paper for this class, but it might be largely empty. It might say, here's the research I would do. What you're going to do for that research paper is you're going to write about, here's the experimental design I would do if I'd actually done this. Here's the statistics I would use, because those are the two other things I want to sort of have some content on, okay? And I just haven't actually done the thing in the middle. So it'll be more like a research plan paper than an actual research paper, right? And you may or may not ever fill in the middle, but that's okay. You'll go on through, here's how I plan the experiment, here's how I will evaluate it, even though I haven't written the middle, and then you'll write the sort of intro-related work in the end. But if you then fill in the research, you actually have the paper largely in a decent structure where you can just drop in results and make that part happen. So, but I'll talk about more of that next class. I don't know why, but I finished 20 minutes early today. Do you want me to just make up stuff, or you want to go? No.
So,
Oh. If they'd like to do a presentation, we cannot cover their costs. Yeah, that's the, so we do not have a budget for bringing in speakers for this class. So one other thing, so if there are two of you as authors, only one of you got the feedback, work with your co-author. For the rest of you, hopefully Wednesday or Thursday. If any of you are, so the way the system works, there was no way for me to give uploads to just some of you. Either I had to give everybody a paperback or nobody a paperback. I have no idea what's going to happen when I go to upload the next batch of these. So please, well, actually, I'll have because I'll have the uploads there. That'll be fine. If you are really dying for your feedback, send me mail, and I might, because I have like 7 or 8 more to go. I can try and prioritize them if you're dying. Some of you had such short papers. I'd be giving you feedback on a paper that hopefully isn't where your paper is now. Those are the ones I'm pushing off to the last bit. But Wednesday I will be doing some more grading, so I'll see where I can get to. Okay, have a good, happy Halloween. Reverse trick-or-treat. So I didn't talk about it. You need to be the first author on A page. Okay. So let's do the first one. Generally, this is the first one, but
actually, it's one paper, like paper or graduation. Okay. But for the others, it could be like
some of you should also go with your advisor. Your advisor may not be involved with that. The rules say you'll be the first author on one. So the last time we had this discussion, the survey paper last week. Survey paper, so we originally meant to be a research paper, but if you publish a survey paper in the good enough venue, it's still like first off the page. Yeah. So that's actually what that is.
So the survey paper,
If you publish it, that's
yes. And you just thought you didn't count because it counts.
so your advisor might say it doesn't count.
Then we need to rest of it counts.
So your advisor, so if you did some, yes, the PhD pro committee, we had one of these last
So
year.
you at least getting some ideas?
Is a good defendant. So what comes down to is it a good defendant? So I think it's a good
So when we talk about good venue, is it like 40% or less? That means it's a good venue, or that it's a different venue?
So that's the committee's going to have a reevaluation of this year because we have no way of verifying when people say their acceptance rate is this year.
And one more.
And we know people are cheating. Right? And therefore, we have to change the metric to something that isn't going to be cheatable, like the H5 index, which is what it is. I'm pretty sure.
Yeah,
Just wait until we're done.
yeah, one more thing that I think is seems more tricky, because it could be this year is lower than 40%, and next year is higher.
Yeah,
And,
and that can be very tricky.
yeah, and for the students, it's not as a problem issue that is submitted and assume that it's going to be lower than 40%.
And then it goes over, yes, you don't have any control of that. So in that sense, looking at the H5 index is probably the safer thing because it doesn't change as much. Like acceptance rates that are 38 and go to 42, that's actually not a big change on their part, but it crossed that threshold. So as I said, the bigger problem we have is right now what would impact Steve is been very unhappy because we want to have, when we say an acceptance rate, we no longer trust what they say. We want to have verifiable data. Here's how many papers were submitted, here's how many papers were published, and we have some way of evaluating if that's likely. Because there are journals and conferences that are saying their acceptance rates, and we just don't believe it doesn't make it.
Well, I believe once a paper accepted, the company should send a letter to the publisher and tell them that what's acceptance rate.
Yeah, the problem is, at the real cheating level, there have been venues where I have been part of, where when they say there's how many papers were submitted, I can see the system. And what they're doing is they're pumping it up by having people submit things that aren't even papers. But they desperate jobs. And so one of these conferences, it was out of Stanford. They said the acceptance rate was like 28%. But I was on the program committee, and actually, because of the way the system was set up, I could see every paper that was submitted. There was like 55 papers, bill papers submitted, but 320 paper IDs allocated. And then they divided by the 320. It's like, there's only 50-some papers, right? And we accepted 32 out of 50-some real papers. It's like, this is not good, right? But they're like, oh no, we accepted 30-some out of 300. We're like 10%. It's like, those weren't real papers. I mean, my guess is somebody on the committee, like, literally had people just go generate random submissions. There were manuals, software manuals being submitted. Like, here's the LaTeX manual. And people were submitting them and putting names on them. It's like, I don't understand this, but I understand it at a different level because a number of universities and schools have gone to, like, it only counts if it meets these criteria. So this stuff was SCI, ISI index, right? This was an index, right? Like, it's ISI indexed. They claimed to have a 10% acceptance rate. People sound it's really good, but I could find no citations in this conference. After I was, so they brought me in, like, I knew one of the guys who was organizing it. And then I recognized it, because a friend of mine was from China who was like, they really play these games big in China to get the promotions and the numbers from it.
Oh yeah.
And it was clearly just in this category. And so,
Yeah, I spent last year just looking for conferences and visiting China and contacting them. What is it? I suppose like conference. Most of them are 25. What's the acceptance rate? Yeah, just submit it and
Well, it's
publish.
yeah, but some have learned that causes them problems. So they're playing these other games and they're saying, well, the acceptance rate's 10%, right? And it's really closer to 60%. Right? So because of that, we're trying to figure out how to balance this, not be too overly aggressive, but also get rid of all this crap that games people are playing.
What is the acceptance rate?
They were H5 indexes, the Google ranking, right? So if we say, for example, if the venue has, so the current rule we're looking at, is ready to change for our tenure process, right, is an H index of 20 or above, or it's in the top 20 of that subcategory of computer science. Because some fields have less citations than others. But I even, for you guys, for your papers, if it is H index of 15 or 10, I'd probably still argue, then the acceptance rate's obsolete. So the problem is when they say they have this kind of acceptance rate of 10 or 12%, and I literally went in and I looked for every paper ever cited, and they publish 30 papers a year. They've been doing this conference for 4 years. There were 2 citations. Oh, and it's like that's okay. One of those might have been self-citations. Right? It wasn't the first author. One of the other authors. That's just not a good thing. So if the conference doesn't show up in Google Scholar, to me that's already the biggest thing. Forget what it is. If it doesn't show up at all, you put the name in, and the answer is it doesn't exist.
Well, here's the thing, like I received an email from the other and said that this is a new conference that's combined between several conferences in a new committee. And I didn't find out. Just it's
Oh
a
no,
new
so we submitted to IEEE blockchain last year was the first IEEE blockchain conference, right? So there wasn't one before that. So there's times when it's not going to exist, and then what you really do to understand the venue is look at the people who are organizing. If the organizers are credible people, then it's probably a credible conference. And I just want to.
It could be fake. I mean, it could be just somebody just posting the minutes to cross the site or cross.
Oh no, so in fact, for journals, that's pretty common that people have fake memory, that it's not part of it. But if you write to them and say, what do you guys, so it's a new conference, one of the easy questions to ask is, so what are you aiming for as an acceptance rate? Is this going to be highly selective, moderately selective, not selective, right? And if you write to one of the people and they write back, then you're not fake.
There's one that it's the deadline I guess December 22nd, and that's in Jordan, and they said that it's the combination between 3 different conferences joined in one big conference.
So were the 3 conferences good?
And
And so if you take 3 things that are nothing and combine them, you get slightly better than nothing, but not necessarily a whole lot. So venues, so I mean, if you have other reason to go to Jordan or whatever, the more exotic the venue, the more likely it is it's bogus. Because the way you get people to go to bogus conferences, right? So if they have those famous hill things on their webpage in Jordan, like I don't know, the cave with the carvings in them or whatever, like that's something I've always wanted to go see. Right? They're trying to get people to go to the locations, not because of venue. Right? So it's in Hawaii. It could be what conference? Could be a bogus conference. Why? Right? Because there's some in Hawaii that really are sort of bogus because they know that it's cheap and people want to go to Hawaii. Right? So there's always a trade-off.
yeah, it's pretty hard to find.
So Chow, your advisor?
Yes.
Yeah, so you can talk to Chow. Like, do these people look good? Right? Does this look credible?
Okay.
See what he said.
So it wasn't provisional status.
Then the year does not count.
Thank you so much. That's exactly what I wanted to know.
You're not officially a PhD student yet. So during your provisional time period, we expect you to be resolving the provisional issues, not doing research.
Wow.
Depends on count towards what? Towards the 6 years, they actually still count it. Towards when you have to finish your oral exam, we give you a little bit of extra time. We don't towards when you have to finish your written exam. Yeah, well, but so, in fact, that's so many people are provisional are working very hard on passing the written exam qualifier, right? And they're not yet on research. We understand that because they often had a non-traditional background, so we're making them work hard to catch up. So your oral exam stuff, you just, so to be honest, because you're in the provisional status, right? If you're in the provisional status now, it won't matter. But when you get off of it, we may forget you were on provisional. So you can always work that out with your advisor and say, oh, no, I get the extra year because I'm provisional. I don't actually know we have that rule written down, but for years, that's what I did. Okay.
So,
Let me stop recording.
sorry.
No, I'd already stopped recording.
Now, so you mentioned a couple times that your thesis had 3 big sections on it. One was in psychology or something, right?
Yeah.
So that means that I don't know your history. I apologize.
It's okay.
So you have a